Welcome, curious souls, to Paranormal M, where reality meets the unknown. Subscribe and turn on notifications to join us as we unravel the secrets of the supernatural. Prepare to be captivated by our latest mysterious adventures. My first and most recent experiences with entities. I respond to a lot of people, and I've never posted on my experiences. The first time I witnessed a ghost was in high school, back in 1878. I was visiting a friend, walked into his house. Just off of the front door was the living room. This guy must mean 1978, just throwing that out there. I turned and I saw a woman by the window. She was dressed more like a woman from the 50s, which I thought was odd. I smiled at her and she smiled back and faded from sight. My jaw must have dropped because my friend said, "You saw her, didn't you?" That was the start of my paranormal journey. Since that time, I've seen and heard all manner of activity, from the mundane to the worst you could imagine. In my home, we have 3 spirits. One is a small girl, maybe 10. She wears a bright-colored dress and has blonde hair. You'll see her darting around corners or letting out the occasional giggle. She likes to tap on things from one side of the house to the other. She's a busy one, but we don't see her every day. We also have a shadow person. I believe it's a woman. She shows up very infrequently, but when she does, her favorite thing to do is stand in the middle of our hallway for about a minute or two and then just fades out. I ran into her about 2 years ago. I was headed back in from having a cigarette and she was in the hall. We must have stared at each other for maybe 30 or 40 seconds. I said, "It's your move," and she faded out. The third one is also a shadow, but a 2-dimensional shadow. This shadow likes to walk past windows at night. We see it on the east side of the house. It walks very close to the window, and my wife was the first one to see it. She was in her office, and she called like she was scared to death. Said she saw a man would be by her window. Took my dogs with me, and there was nothing there, of course. My dogs will bark like nuts if a bird farts 10 feet from a window. So they should have reacted to someone getting into our yard, but they didn't. My wife also said there was no noise. We have gravel on that side of the house. No sound at all. Radio conversations I can hear in my office without a radio in my office. This is something interesting that's been happening to me. It started maybe 2 years ago. I was working in my home office when I heard what sounded like a conversation going on. It was like talk radio-like. It carried on for about half an hour or so. Now, my wife had gone to bed and we live alone, so no kids to be talking to. I don't have a radio in my office. I was not listening to anything. I was reading and doing some research. The conversation was rather muted. I couldn't hear what was being said. However, it did sound like 2 men talking. I do have a radio in the house, but I would be able to hear it clearly in my office. This has happened several times, on and off. Something I would hear is a man and woman talking, just loud enough to hear voices, but not loud enough to understand the conversation. I thought maybe my neighbor had a radio going, but their house is 20 feet from mine with a 7-foot block wall between us. I'm sure the sound couldn't travel that far. I live in Arizona, so it's very rare that we have our windows open, especially in the summer months. and we do not want to give scorpions an easy way into the house. A few times I hold up my SB7 spirit box, and other than a few unintelligible voice-like sounds, I couldn't hear anything that would be like what I was hearing. So the voice continues, now and again. I just find it very odd that it even happens. And just in case the topic comes up, I am mentally competent, and I've never heard a voice in my head ever. What I have learned about investigating the paranormal. While investigating locations of alleged hauntings or paranormal activity, an investigator needs to determine if this is a legitimate claim or not. Before we investigate any location, we do a search for any history if needed. I mean, if a home was built within the past 30 years. We don't consider a deep historical workup would be needed. Secondly, we interview the individual who contacted us to get more insight into what they experience. We do not ask for hot spots, as they cause my predisposition of activity happening, rather. We prefer to do a cold investigation. My wife is a sensitive, and as such, she's not present during any interview. From our interview, we can determine if the location could be experiencing paranormal activity. We're very careful to not state a location as haunted at the beginning of our investigation or following until we review any data collected. I believe there are two important things any investigator needs to practice. The first is to not be so intense to find any activity to the point that any small noise or any recorded garble becomes evidence. The need to understand that, while running vids that they can and can't do some distortion while recording depending on the light available, if not using IR, FLIR, or UV light. These distortions could lead to false positives, or pareidolia, rather than actual evidence. The second thing is to be methodical in your investigation. Running around in the dark, supposedly chasing sounds or what may be considered an apparition looks like a slapstick comedy scene. Take one room at a time, moving from one end to the other. Run vids and still photos. You shouldn't attempt to interpret data during investigation, rather during review away from the location. Most of this should seem like common sense, however, I have on many occasions found this not to be the case. I'm not trying to detract from other investigators. I'm sharing what I've seen and continue to see in my over 30 years of chasing the ghosts. I hope my insight may help people who are looking to do the same. Not everything is as it seems, at least not all the time. There are many things that can and do happen for any number of reasons. The greater majority occur when no one's around to see or witness it, such as a tree falling in a forest. I am aware of the debate over this. Shooting stars or old run-down building in remote areas having siding, roof, and tiles fall off and no one's there to see it. The same does occur during investigations, on a daily or rare occasions when no one can witness it. I have been chasing paranormal events, hauntings, poltergeists, and demonic possessions for many years now. While I see many comments that receive, well, fairly negative comments, I believe one doesn't consider the circumstances in which these events were experienced. The frame of mind of the observer, either investigator or individual, can also be important when, considering if they've truly experienced something paranormal or otherworldly. Because we were not there when these events happened, how then can we know if they are true or not? We cannot base our consideration of these events through the narrow lens of the scripted reality that we consume, nor can we base our understanding of what we may be considered naturally occurring phenomena. To consider this, one would need to know what types of natural phenomena happens at a location or site that's claimed to be haunted. If this is met with positive interest, I will continue to post what I've experienced, observed, as well as what I've found to be anything paranormal. My name is Alex. I would like to hear from you. Colonel Lewis. So this story happened around March of this year. I was working as a custodial helper at an elementary. It's one of my jobs that I was doing to get rid of the shoe scuffs off the floors. I used this little tennis ball on a stick thing, and the stick was really short, so I looked up because my back hurt. The light in this office area that was used for, student services flicked on. A man in uniform, full uniform, with medals and rifle walked in and turned toward me. I was about 20 feet away down the hall and I saw this. It kind of scared me a little bit because the school was closed and the school closes at 6. It was about 6:30, so there's no one in the building other than me and 3 other coworkers and my boss. There's no one else that could be in the school, so I was kind of spooked by this. So I walked up, and I asked him what he was doing, which in hindsight was not the smartest of ideas. But oh well, so I walked closer. He looked at me and then faded away and the light flipped off. I was like, oh, that's really weird. So I went on my way and kind of forgot about it. Ends at 7, so it's 6:45. The office of my boss talks to us about how the day was and what we could do better, Just kind of a quick little meeting, nothing special. So we went down and I was going to tell him about it and forgot about it. And then when I got home, I remember. So I did a little research. Turns out the spot where the school was built was like an old military base. So I kept digging a little bit. I found a picture of a guy that looked like the guy I saw, but just a little older. I'll post it and his name. His name is Colonel Lewis. A few weeks later, when I saw him again, pacing up and down the halls, I asked him, "Is your name Colonel Lewis?" And he nodded yes, then faded away. A few weeks later, I quit. So I couldn't talk to him more, but on my way out, the boss told me a story of how the old principal saw a ghost running toward her, yelling, "Get out! Go leave right now!" like in an angry voice. So the next day, she resigned. I don't know what this is or what happened. This is the first time this has happened to me. Help me learn. I don't believe in things that aren't proven or that I can't see with my own eyes. I've been interested in the supernatural and paranormal, sure, but I personally never have believed in ghosts or things like that. I think that's changed. I don't know how this works, and I won't even begin to think that I do. I'll explain to the best of my will. About 15 minutes ago, I saw a face. I just joined this Reddit community 2 minutes ago, because I was getting so frickin' scared. I did that involuntary inhale, hand over heart, pulse skyrocketing, all that jazz. Scared the ever-loving hell out of me. I'm an 18-year-old female, currently living in a double-wide trailer home with my mom and her boyfriend. It's 11:17 at night, and my trailer and room doesn't really have a built-in light, so you need to plug in a lamp for it to work. So I was putting my 2 cockatiels away by the light of the floor-to-ceiling lamp, and I turned off the lamp with a switch that's built into it when I looked over, and I swear to the gods above, I saw a face peeking around the corner. Not a peek around, see me and go back, no. It was watching me, and it drew back once I turned and glanced at it. It was humanoid in shape, but it was a dull orange, maybe lightly glowing. It wasn't a shadow, but it wasn't a true figure either. It was blobby, for lack of better words. I couldn't tell how old or the gender, but I'd assume it was my height if standing straight, accounting for it lowering itself to look around a doorway. This trailer's had its number of sightings from my siblings and my mom's boyfriend's daughter. My sibling says that she heard a voice talking or calling her name. My mom's boyfriend's daughter ran into my room in the middle of the night, freaking out and saying along the lines of, "There was a person outside of the window, and then they came into the room and they stared at me." I don't believe in the impossible, but I've seen it, and I want to learn more. I need to know what this means or is, and I swear to God this isn't some attention post to get likes or a story. This was real to me, and to my sister and my mom's boyfriend's daughter. I need answers, please. Ask Reddit. My friend's house is haunted, and I got lost in his downstairs. It's a small 2-floor house with the entrance on the 2nd floor. I went downstairs to the bathroom. I came back out. I wasn't able to find the stairs. At the time, it was fine, because it was one of the first times being downstairs, and I wanted to explore anyways. So I went into 3 rooms, one with a drum set, one with a bed and a beanbag chair, and one with a bunch of paintings. After I came out of the room with the paintings, I found the stairs again and went upstairs. I thought nothing of it, even though the trek from the stairs to the bathroom was probably 10 feet in a straight path. Talking with my friend on one other day, I mentioned the 3 rooms he had downstairs. He goes silent for a minute and says, "Dude, there's only 2 rooms downstairs." Sure enough, I go back and there are only 2 rooms. The room with the paintings never existed, even though I went in and looked around. Also, not being able to find the stairs was strange, because from the bathroom to the stairs, it just looked to the right. But all I remember when coming out of the bathroom was a wall there and another painting. We talk about it sometimes, and he just keeps telling me that I went into another dimension. All the paintings were sea-themed. The painting covering the wall and stairs had a sailboat, and no one of his family paints. Ask Reddit. I'm a female, and I was traveling in a different country. I knew no one in the city. I ended up meeting someone one afternoon who offered to show me around the following night. I suppose I should have called it quits there, but I guess I was naive to the scenario. He seemed quite pleasant at the time and didn't give me any bad vibes. The following night comes, and as I'm waiting for him to show up, I run into an elderly lady who's clearly very distressed. I ask if she's okay. She tells me she desperately needs to get home and give her son medication, that her car just broke down. No problem. The guy arrives and I ask if we can take her. He obliges. It's not a big deal, nor is it far away, so we drop her off and she's so grateful. We continue to drive around the city until we reach a bar. We have one drink, and long story short, he invites me back to his place for a drink. Again, I probably should have said yes, but he swears to me that he'll drop me back off where he picked me up earlier. Fine. We arrive at his house, which is actually a shed with a makeshift pull-out couch and TV. Trying to be polite, I stay for a drink and say I want to go back now. He tells me that he's too drunk to drive and won't be doing that. I say, okay, no problem. What's a number for a taxi I can call? He instantly gets furious and proceeds to tell me what he's going to call his friend, his ride or die, to sort this out. He calls his friend, and I'm starting to panic. pick up my things and the bottle of wine, and he asks what I'm going to do with it. Assumes I'm greedy and taking it home. I really don't say anything. But in fact, I'm thinking I'm going to hit him over the head with it if I need to while I back up slowly to the door. I make my escape. Find that I'm down a side road which is dimly lit. Can't even tell which way is out, and there's not many houses around. I hear traffic, so I start running toward it. It's my only chance I have, so no idea if he followed me out. I don't dare look back. I'm running for my life, and thankfully end up at a gas station, and I run inside panting. I ask if they can call me a cab. As the clerk's about to call, though, I see one pull up. I run up to him because I'm looking to get the hell out of Dodge. He lets me in, but first wants to confirm that I have money. I show him my cash, and he starts driving. He tells me that there's a jail not too far away, and a lot of recently released citizens will walk to the gas station, get a cab, and then jump out when it's time to pay. I tell him that's not my case. We proceed to where I want to go. I didn't realize just how far out of the city I was. Staying on a boat at the time, so I was dropped off at the water's edge. I'm leaving out a bit of info to summarize the story, so the next problem arises. How do I get back to the boat? It's an anchor, or rather at anchor. It's too far and too dark to swim. The water taxi's not running, and now no one on board's awake. I'm ugly crying at this point because my adrenaline just wore off and I just want to be back in a safe place. That's when I hear a little voice. Do you know where I can get some wine at this time of night? I look up and a middle-aged lady is sitting outside by a brick wall. She's underneath a streetlight in a blue milk crate. Tell her I don't know where to buy wine at this hour, but we can certainly drink mine. We drink it together and she tries to call me a water taxi even though we both know there's no chance. Then she tells me to use her phone to dial the captain. Thankfully he picks up and he'll be on his way in a few minutes. While we waited, she gave me a cinnamon-smelling candle out of her purse. She says that she just feels like I should have it. She shows me a recent picture of her nice camera of her wedding of her dog. I see the captain arrive and I thank her immensely, then say goodbye. I have no idea what she was doing there or why she was out in the middle of the night, but she was so incredibly comforting. Can't even describe it. It was as if she was put there in the exact right place at the exact right time. She didn't ask why I was upset. She just kept me positive and comforted me as best as she could. It's so incredibly random, I know. I've since matured and learned my lesson. I don't remember her name, but I do remember where we sat and what her wedding photos looked like. I will forever be so incredibly grateful for her presence. Ask Reddit. We were sitting on a concrete wall eating the best burgers from the local McDonald's at close to midnight. To our right, about 20 feet away, is a rather large bush that blocks our vision. My 3 friends and I are chatting and eating when I notice from behind the bush steps a man. My friends didn't notice him at first, but I did. Picture a man in his late 60s. Still physically able, however, slicked back gray hair and a deep tan only given to those who spend a lifetime in the sun. This man struts up to us dripping in swagger straight from the 1970s because disco never died and neither did he. Not only does he have the 70s swagger, he has the fashion. I mean a button-up long-sleeve gold polyester shirt with the top 4 buttons omitted, along with black bell-bottom pants, shoes that clicked when he walked, and a sweet gold chain necklace. Did I mention the unlit cigarette hanging out of his mouth? He approaches us and says, "Hey, do you guys have a match?" This was early 2010s, and he didn't say lighter. He specifically said a match. Most of us said that we didn't, except one of my friends looked down the wall next to him. Do you know what was there? A fucking matchbook. My friend hands it to him and the man thanks him. The guy lit up his cigarette and starts walking away. My friends keep talking because they didn't seem to notice how crazy this all was. I watched until the man reaches the bush when I turned my head to answer one of my friends, and I looked away for a split second and he was gone. The woman in the rocking chair. My family grew up in a town where almost everybody worked in basically one factory. It was a glass factory that made windshields for cars and glass for tall buildings. Most of the jobs there were really dangerous. My great-uncle worked there when he first married my grandma's sister. They were poor, as they moved into the upper floor and attic of his grandparents' house. One night while he was at work, she woke up and there was a woman sitting in the rocking chair in the corner of the room brushing her hair. She waited a while to make sure she wasn't dreaming and finally said, "Who are you?" The woman turned into a mist, went up through the ceiling. This happened several times, but my aunt never said anything because she was afraid people would think she was nuts. The woman would always look like she wanted to say something. Finally, one day when she appeared, she looked at my aunt and said, "Skinny can't go to work on August 22nd. Skinny is what they called my great-uncle. She was really shook up by this, but the woman's appearances stopped. She decided she had better take this seriously. So she started begging her husband not to go to work on that day. He hardly ever missed and demanded to know a reason. She couldn't give him a good reason, but she cried and pleaded until he finally agreed to stay home. A boiler exploded that day, killing every man on his shift. We still have the newspaper clippings to prove it. After this happened, he obviously wanted to know how on earth he knew to tell him not to go to work. But she still wouldn't tell him. Finally, his grandmother was talking to her and begged her to let her know that she'd saved his life. She told her the story of the woman in the rocking chair. She turned white. His parents had died in a car accident, and when he was an infant, he used to say he was going up in the attic to talk to his mom, who was brushing her hair in the rocking chair. They wouldn't let him go up there anymore because they thought it was unhealthy for him to pretend. That house is still standing in the town where I live. I've never been in it, but I'd love to see if the woman in the rocking chair is still there. The apparition I saw while being on safety patrol. This happens in Bowie, Maryland, near Bel Air Mansion. I was 9, and this happened in 1991. I was in 4th grade, and a safety patrol for Tulip Grove Elementary. I'd lived in the area for maybe only a year at this point, and I did know of the rumors that the mansion was haunted. The grounds around the mansion, not so much. My patrol post was Tapered Lane. It was close to the mansion. My responsibility as a safety patrol was simple. Cross kids across Tapered Lane, make sure they're behaving themselves, and tell kids to get off the grass at people's homes. The mansion and my patrol post were both on a hill. The mansion was across the street from my post on Tulip Grove Drive, which was a more major road than Tapered. In the mornings, I kind of crossed kids going from the direction of Bel Air Drive that were headed to the school. In the afternoons, I crossed them going vice versa. My experience was in the morning. It was sunny. A group of students arrived to be crossed. I hold out my arms as if I'm trying to make a T with my body. I look towards the right where Tapered continues. I look towards the left where Tulip Grove Drive is. I look behind me toward the direction of the mansion and Bel Air Drive. All of this is to make sure no cars are coming before crossing the kids. I look ahead of me just to make sure no cars are coming up from the direction of the school. I see a kid about my age then scurrying up the hill. It was on the property of the house that was on the corner of Teepert Lane. He had brown hair and blue eyes. Considering I've been a shorty even then, I assumed he was slightly taller than me. He had freckles, he wore a shirt that resembled a sailor's uniform, and had navy shorts on that went nearly to his knees. He was on the grass through someone's yard. As I crossed the kid, since all the roads were clear of cars, I yelled at the kid to get off the grass. He vanished before it was done saying get off the grass, and I was perplexed. Did he just vanish in front of me? Nah, there's a big shrubbery on the corner of the yard in this house. I normally place my backpack in front of it, at least when I was patrolling it that afternoon. I looked behind me to make sure there wasn't any kids coming, and I crossed Teepert Lane to look behind the shrub. My thought was, he ducked behind the shrub, though I thought the bush at the time. To avoid me yelling at him, I checked behind the shrub and he wasn't there. Huh. Okay, next thought I had was he decided to run down the hill towards the school to avoid me reprimanding him. So I looked down the hill where I could see the kids I just crossed. However, I couldn't see him. I didn't see anyone running, and the thing is this kid would have stood out because, well, it was too cool to wear shorts. Everyone was wearing jackets and pants. I went back across Teepert and pondered. I didn't see him with the kids I just crossed, or even running ahead of them. I didn't see him behind the shrub, and I didn't see him cross Tulip Grove. He really would have gotten in trouble. We did have a crossing guard down there to kids across that street. He didn't come up my way as I was crossing the kids, and he didn't go down Teepert. However, my mind kept pointing out, you saw him vanish as he was going up the small hill on that person's lawn. My rational kept saying there's no way someone would vanish into thin air. Here's the thing, and it's something I've struggled to come to terms with for 32 years now. I saw this boy in full frontal view. I didn't see this out of the corner of my eye, and he was solid. He wasn't see-through. I literally saw a solid-looking being vanish in front of me in full frontal view. And even after all this time, I don't know how to process that. Now, being into history, I learned that his attire was from the Victorian era. I also purchased a book that talked about the history of the mansion and the surrounding area, so I was hoping to pinpoint who I saw or who may have been in what accident in what area and this would have happened in. I was aware of some deaths. Fortunately, the records of people living at that mansion between the time of the Taskers and the Woodworks living there wasn't really well kept, so I still have no clue who that boy could have been. This experience didn't scare me, it just made me go, what the? A lot. It still does. I think if anybody saw a fully solid person vanish right in front of them, they'd feel the same way. I'd have to agree with you. Footsteps. The last house I lived in here was in Sweden. It had been my significant other's grandfather's initially. My significant other had lived in the U.S. for a few years on a work visa, moved back to Sweden when it expired. He moved in with his grandfather, or farfar, Swedish for father's father. Because he was to inherit his grandfather's house and his grandfather died, really. His grandfather was 93 or 94 and my significant other moved in with him. He died a few months later in his sleep. He found him when he came home from work. He was the second person to die in the house, as the first person was the initial owner of the house. She also died in her sleep. His grandmother, farmor, Swedish for father's mother, he had died a few years before I met my significant other, but she died in a care home since she had Alzheimer's. The house was built in the mid-40s. I lived in the house for the first 13 years I lived in Sweden. However, I never had any experiences when I visited Sweden before moving there in 2006, and I didn't experience anything for the first 7 years I lived there. Activity didn't really pick up until after the kids were born. There's a theory that paranormal activity can increase when children are around because of how much energy children have, since spirits need energy to manifest themselves. So let's just get to the experiences that I had in that house. The most common experience that I, as well as some other people who visited the house, had was when footsteps were heard on the stairs. Now, one way to try to debunk that would be if there were pipes beneath your stairway, because they can make noises, especially if they're old. I didn't have pipes beneath the stairs, but I did have a freezer. However, it was like if it was truly the freezer making the footstep noises, it would have started from the get-go rather than a year before my son was born. Not to mention it would be something that one would hear every day rather than once in a while. A few memorable stories involving footsteps on the stairs was after my kids were born. We were upstairs. I was holding my infant daughter while my son was a toddler and playing. I hear footsteps coming upstairs. My significant other was at work. We did have a roommate that lived out in the guest house. I thought she was coming up, but never made it up the stairs. Even my son took a look to see if anyone was coming. Had it been her, he would have heard her go back down the stairs, not just up. About a year later, we had another roommate out in the guest house. It was sometime after 4:30 a.m. I knew he'd be leaving for work early. I woke up to someone walking around the kitchen before going up the stairs. I knew it wasn't my significant other as he had already left. I wondered why the roommate was going upstairs, because he never does that in the morning. Waited for him to come back down, and he never did. Then I looked outside, and as I expected, my significant other's car is gone. What I didn't expect was to see the roommate's car gone too, because I just heard someone go up the stairs and never heard anybody come back down the stairs, just up it. I thought, what the fuck? Went upstairs to see who it could be. I looked around and saw no one. I went back to sleep thinking to myself, ugh, ghosties are acting up. Another similar experience happened the year before, but it was after 4:30 in the afternoon. The kids were spending time with their grandma, my significant other's mom. I was feeling frisky. Obviously, I won't go into details of that. However, I was downstairs, heard my significant other go downstairs and walk around the kitchen. I asked, "Want to join me?" No response. Felt a bit hurt. I noticed I don't hear him go back up the stairs and wondered if he was still downstairs. I looked around downstairs for him and he wasn't downstairs. Thought it was odd, went upstairs. He was there. I thought, well, he moves quietly. Sometimes you can't hear him on the steps, which is true. I've jump scared a few times, but he has appeared behind me since I didn't hear him approach. He moves like a ghost. I asked him why he didn't say anything to me, and when I asked him to join me downstairs, he gave me a what the fuck expression. He was like, I never went downstairs. I've been up here the whole time. What? However, these are the two biggest experiences when it comes to footsteps on the stairs. I did hear footsteps once on the floor above, and this ties to another experience I had been home by myself. My children had spent the night with their grandmother in town, so my significant other had been working. I was going to swing by his mom's place to pick up the kids. At the time I was expecting them, I was upstairs and I heard a car door slam. I then heard the front door open, thinking they were home. I went downstairs to greet them, however no one was there. Even more chillingly, the door was still locked with a latch. I would have heard the latch if somebody tried to open the door, and I never heard it. Just the front door opening. Even more puzzling was that there was no car in the driveway. But then, as I'm mulling about downstairs, I hear footsteps walking around upstairs. I looked up at the ceiling and muttered, ghosties, of course. I go upstairs and no one's there. Shadow person. I've lived in 2 houses here in Sweden since I moved there in 2006. There is the one that I currently live in now, and the one I lived in for the first 12 years I lived in Sweden. In the last post I made about the last house, I talked about the footsteps I experienced. Today will be only about the only visual experience I ever had while living in that house. Now, to point out, I didn't experience much activity when I visited the house prior to moving to Sweden in 2006. I didn't experience much after I moved in. It wasn't until 7 years later that I began to experience activity. That's because that's when my first kid was born. 18 months later, my second child was born. There's a theory that children can cause paranormal activity to increase, because they have loads of energy which spirits need to help them manifest. A quick background. This last house that we lived in had been my significant other's grandfather's house. My significant other inherited the house after his grandfather died. By the way, his grandfather died in the house as well as the first owner. They both died in their sleep. They were over 90, and thus begins my experience. It was 4:30 in the morning. There's 3 bedrooms in the house, 2 downstairs and 1 upstairs. One downstairs was for the kids. The other was us, and the one upstairs had been reserved as a guest house. However, the kids and I would sometimes sleep up in that room because it was freezing downstairs. We had a pellet burner, and sometimes the damn thing didn't work right or just ran out of pellets, which I would fill up in the morning as I'd have to go heft up 16-kilogram bags of pellets, go down the stairs to the basement. It had weak lighting in there, and no railing, which was a safer thing to do in the morning than at night. So that would be a reason why the downstairs would be freezing more than the upstairs. Upstairs was a little bit more warmer. Towards the last few months of living in that house, my significant other would sleep in the guest house. That way it wouldn't disturb us when we got up to go to work in the morning, which was early. At the time, he worked at a company that was about an hour away from where we lived. This would be the reason we would eventually move to the area that we live at now. But then, he would wake up early and leave around 4:30 to go to work. He'd have to be there by about 6 a.m. He would give himself an extra hour to chill out and shower at his job, since a lot of companies here have showers to use, especially if they're in a factory. However, sometimes he would come up and say goodbye to me before leaving. So one early morning I woke to a shadow of someone standing over my bed. I thought initially that it was my significant other. Out of all the words I say while narrating, when I see the capital S-O, I fall over myself. My apologies. I thought initially that it was my significant other. I reached up to give him a hug and a kiss. However, as I was reaching up, I noticed that the shadow was taller than my significant other. He was about 5'4" to give you an idea. This shadow was at least 6 feet tall, and suddenly I thought it was a home intruder, so I gave it a punch. My hand went through it. Not only does my hand go through it, but the shadow disappears just as my fist did go through it. Oddly enough, I don't really recall feeling like a coldness as I did that. Had this been an honest-to-God person, I would have seen it run for the door as they escaped. My fist would have made contact, not vanish. The shadow itself didn't have any features. It reminds me of the face they have on mannequins. After this happened, I shook my head and went, ghosties are at it again. Went back to sleep immediately. I have to disclaim that I have a pretty weird reaction to paranormal activity and ghosts in general. I can sense their presence even when they aren't doing anything like moving stuff or footsteps. So when they do something like that, or what they did here, I'm not surprised by it. I just mutter, oh, ghosties, or, ghosties are at it again, and go about my day. However, the irony of me seeing that shadow person in that room, that's the room where my significant other's grandfather died in. Weird activity after watching a video in 2014. I was watching a chibi video of WWE with my cousin, and one of the characters has a weird laugh. I look toward my uncle's room and try to look for his Deadpool head, but I see a chibi statue of the exact character that we were watching. I said that I didn't know how our uncle bought that one. Yes, Gecko. I said wait out loud and heard something fall and saw one of the Deadpool heads, but not the statue. I didn't know the head was there because, well, it was a 2-foot statue. I looked inside and didn't see it anywhere in sight. Both me and my cousin heard the laughter continue, and I thought I accidentally played the video again, but my YouTube app wasn't open anymore since I closed it on accident and my phone was on silent. I walked towards the other end of the room that we're in, and I see a quick glimpse of the statue waving at me slightly from the roof of the garage and screamed, "Oh my gosh!" My cousins ran to the window and didn't see it, and it was gone. We heard something fall in a tiny closet in that room, which is like a living room in the back of the house. Open the door and nothing seems to have fallen. We close the door slowly and we hear shaking again for about 3 seconds. We hear the same laughter again, and I grab my cousin around the arms, and we're now back to back trying to figure out where the laughter's coming from. We realize that we're pointing in different directions. We decided to go to the actual living room to just TV. 2 weeks later, we're in the room again, just playing with toys, but mostly watching wrestling videos since I was a 14-year-old girl who just wanted to watch sports, and my cousin was a 10 or 11 and he loved wrestling before I did. We randomly decide to watch Marvel crack videos, and as soon as we play a video, we heard the creepy laughing again, and I said, let's just watch TV in the living room. I asked my cousin earlier this year if he remembers that day, and his mouth dropped in shock. He had a memory of it, but assumed it was a creepy dream he had since he had weird dreams around that time. I couldn't watch chibi wrestling videos until 2018 in fear of, well, all that happened again. My cousin also said that when, I realized our uncle didn't have a statue like that, I only heard something fall and assumed it was the statue. He said he actually saw a CD case being pulled out and fall on the floor by itself. Ask Reddit. I'm sure this will get buried, but it's a good one. When I was about 16, I lived with my mom and stepdad in a shop in Brighton. It's in Australia. The place felt heavy. All 3 of us had some wild experiences in that place. And also some of my friends who visited as well. Mom said when she was painting the lounge, when all alone, the window started rattling and the door slammed shut behind her. She firmly told it to get out of her house. Didn't show up again for about 1.5 years. I'll skip to my story. I saw quite a few shadows out of my peripheral vision at different times. And once when I was at the kitchen table, which looked down a hall ending in the lounge, I saw a shadow figure of an old hunched woman. She was walking from the lounge, stopped to look at me, and then disappeared into the wall to the left. Another time my parents were out and I was watching TV at home alone with the lights flickering. The door slammed and my cat went crazy. Another time, my parents were out and I locked myself out. The buildings were connected. If you look up Street View on Church Street, Brighton, just past Middle Brighton Station, this was over 20 years ago, and I went to the neighbors who owned an antique shop at the time. I asked if I could climb out their window to access my house. Walked up their stairs and felt crushing blackness and sorrow from their upstairs living quarters. I climbed out the window and could breathe again. My house felt bad, but theirs was another level. I heard people running up and down the stairs when no one else was home. My stepfather constantly heard people in the shower when no one was home. One night, it was in the middle of an Australian summer, about 38 degrees or 104 Fahrenheit. My cat again went crazy, running between 2 posts outside, meowing like crazy when she reached both ends. I was unsettled sitting in my bed and felt cold, like ice grabbed the back of my right arm. Like someone had put their whole hand on the back of my arm and squeezed tightly. 2 weeks later, the house burned down, and the fire started in the middle of my bed. Ask Reddit. I had a haunted bed as a child. Not really haunted per se, but there was definitely something attached to it. We didn't have a lot of money growing up. My parents shopped at a secondhand store a lot. One year, my mom just buys a mattress and a frame. The mattress was the old school type with like a bright blue fabric and a lining of padding material. The bottom half was made of wood and it sat on top of a metal frame. After 2 weeks of having it, I would hear a knocking noise in the bottom wood section of the frame. This would happen almost every night, between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. It wasn't all night. It would be real random knocks like clack, clack, clack. Then it would stop and start again a few hours later. I told my parents about the noise. My dad ended up flipping the mattress, cutting the bottom fabric that covered the wood and checking to see if a mouse had come along. Nothing, no mouse, no bite or scratch marks, but my dad continued to believe that that's what I heard. It was the sound of a mouse chewing through the wooden frame. He laid mouse traps all over the house and nothing. After a few months, the clacking got louder. I was scared at first, but after a while it got so annoying and just wouldn't let me sleep. I knocked back at it, but then it turned into a game. Whatever was making that sound would mimic the knocking noise I made on the frame. Every night it got louder until one day my dad decided he was going to sleep in the same room as me. He finally heard it. At this point, I knew not to entertain the noise and would sleep right through it. He woke me up and flipped the bed again, only to find nothing. Put it back and waited for the noise and nothing. He did that for 2 days before finally tossing that piece of shit bed. Ask Reddit. My grandparents have lived in their house for 30 plus years. They typically had, family gatherings in their finished and multi-room basement. And even as kids, we always made sure to go in groups if we ever had to go to the main floor for the bathroom because it always felt off. Not only off, but eerie too. And especially when no one was around. The house would always creak, and all of the grandchildren claimed the creaks were footsteps. They also have a back area to their home with a couple of rooms that are always much colder than the rest of the house. My sister and I were about 7 or 8 staying at my grandparents' house in the front room, which used to be my youngest aunt's. At midnight-ish, we heard a child talking. It sounded like it was coming from inside the walls. We froze to make sure we both heard it, and when it stopped. When it started again, my sister basically became Usain Bolt and dipped to my grandparents' room, leaving me alone. My grandma came in to me basically almost crying and opened a small doorway which led to a storage area. Not an entire room, just a mini closet. Pulled out a baby doll toy. Apparently, that's what was, talking and crying as she shrugged it off, even though there was zero explanation as to why it randomly went off at midnight. It wasn't new, but its batteries weren't dying, so I don't even think it was switched on, to be honest. We haven't slept over there since, and when I told the aunt who used to sleep there, she claimed she always felt the house was haunted too. Had many encounters in that room. Once she also couldn't sleep around midnight. She felt watched. Then suddenly she felt her mind go into a weird lulled state and felt something cold creeping through her body until it reached the other side and exited from her fingertips with a pop feeling. She suddenly felt tired, turned her TV off and went to bed. She swears the TV became static when she felt the way she did. But it was the 80s, so that was possible even without the ghost. A friend of another aunt is a medium. And when she visited my grandma's house, she told her that there was a lot of heavy and dark spirits in the house. But they didn't fuck with my grandma since she was a strong woman. Apparently the rest of us are fair game, though. Unsettling experience I had with my friends when I had a sleepover. So back in the days when I was around 12 or 13 years old, one of my close girlfriends had a birthday sleepover at her country house. We were 4 girls in total, not including my birthday girl's little sister who was 6. We spent the first day just celebrating the birthday and hanging out with her family at the nice country house. This was kind of a fancy house, with a nice and spacious guest house a bit further away on their land, where we were supposed to have our sleepover. When it was time for bed, we got comfortable in the guest house, with some of us sleeping on mattresses on the floor. Some of the girls got a bit scared by the fact that we were staying in the guest house and wanted to be able to lock the door, which the parents were a bit hesitant to at first. This was one of those locks that when you open it with the key both ways, so I guess they were afraid that we would be able to lock ourselves in or something. But at last we were allowed to lock it. It was a very classic sleepover with candy, horror movies, and gossiping. I don't remember when we fell asleep, but I remember waking up in the middle of the night noticing it was kind of bright outside. This was in the middle of the summer and in Sweden, which means that it gets bright outside at around 3 in the morning. One of my friends was still awake watching Harry Potter without audio, and I stayed up for a bit and watched it with her before falling back into sleep. Next day it was time to go back home again. We spent some additional time hanging out at the main house before we started packing up the guest house. I was the first one to finish my packing, so while I was waiting for my friends to finish, I sat at the sofa where I had left my digital camera on the sofa table. During this time in my preteens, I took a lot of photos of, wanted to document my life. So I naturally had a lot of pictures to go through from that weekend. I decided to look through the pictures on my camera while waiting, and that's when I discovered something very odd. In my camera album, at a random spot in the reel of pictures, there was at least 10 to 15 or 20 even pictures of me and my friends sleeping. They were taken from a variety of high and low angles and without flash. Group pictures where you could see all of us from far away in close-up, and individual shots of our faces close-up. The fact that there were so many pictures of us with us so variety and, just made me feel incredibly freaked out. I'm not proud of myself, but I was kind of also like 12 or 13 years old and had never experienced something like this before. So my little preteen brain decided was the best next step was to get somewhat detached from reality and just delete everything in the memory card, including whatever pictures I had on there from some other times. Of course, right after that I realized what I did and I started freaking out and crying, which alerts my friends. They wanted to know what happened, and when I told them, they understandably got mad at me and didn't believe me. Then they started to freak out too when they realized that I've never really been a prankster. Wouldn't be able to act up this well. This then became a whole situation where the parents had to calm 4 hysterical kids down while reassuring us that they had not pulled a prank on us. In the end, my friends decided not to really believe me. We never spoke about it ever again. This could absolutely just be a prank gone wrong by our parents or the little sister, but the fact that we had locked the door, maybe they had a spare key, but why would the parents then not want us to lock the door to begin with? They would have to get up in the middle of the night and spend minutes taking pictures with us, like a flash up close in our face. Just didn't feel like something her parents would have done. Her little sister was very short and young and couldn't have pulled off taking so many pictures with different angles. Plus, she's freaked out too. Again, this might just be a bad prank, or a good one depending on how you view it. Maybe it was by her parents and they just decided not to admit it, but it still feels incredibly creepy to think that somebody or something took pictures of us while we were sleeping with my camera. When you see yourself without a mirror, So almost 20 years ago now, holy crap. I was home alone with my little brother. We were both teens, and our folks had gone away on a trip, nothing too new. Our house was on 3 acres of land, a quarter of it being woods. The right side of the house butted up against the woods along the back right corner, which is where our deck existed. The deck had 2 levels, spaced by only about a foot drop, and then the stairs to the backyard would have been another 10 feet. This wasn't our first time home alone, but it would be the first time in our lives to experience something that to this day we couldn't explain. A little past 10 p.m., we had been standing in the kitchen waiting for dinner to finish in the oven. We were talking while watching Mythbusters reruns. I was wearing a blue shirt with gray sweatpants. He was wearing a green shirt with gray sweatpants. At one point, when our conversation stopped, I was looking at the sliding glass door on the deck. I realized that my little brother's reflection had a red shirt and a blue jean. 2 things instantly had the hair on my neck standing on end. 1, my little brother was not wearing these colors at the moment. 2, I shouldn't have been able to see his legs in the reflection at all. When I went to do a double take, he looked at me only for a split second before locking his eyes back on the person on the deck as well. We could both see him clear as day because the spotlight on the house we kept at night due to the time, kind of like recent break-ins. The person on the deck was my little brother, that's no question, but that simply wasn't possible. And the person only stood for about another second, simply calmly smiling at us before turning and walking through the railing on the second level right off the deck into the woods. He didn't jump the railing, lean, or even slouch and flip. He walked through the railing and vanished like he had fallen to the ground at sight. We didn't call the cops, we didn't tell my folks, we waited and ate dinner. Kept the dogs and Dad's revolver with us the rest of the night. Looking back on it years later, we only recently discussed it again. And he asked something I myself had thought of the year before. So we saw a full other me. Did you ever see another you? No. Wonder why. He's married, has his own place and a kid now. I live halfway across the country. The only thing I still wonder about is if I should have gone to check. But given the break-ins, the fact that there's no light under the deck, and the fact that whatever the hell it was walked through 2 solid inches of wood covered in plastic, I'm happy I didn't. I keep hearing my dead cat's meow. I had to put her down due to kidney failure. It's been 6 weeks already. She was my soulmate, and she used to communicate a lot with me. When she died, I had a couple of dreams that she was sleeping with me, like she used to. And it felt nice, but then after a while I started to hear her meow around the house. I do have 2 other cats, but their meows are vastly different from hers. I can tell their tone, even their footsteps' weight. If you're a cat owner, you know what I'm talking about. Never the same. Thought it was just the stress, because it was a terrible month prior to her passing. Then I started to wake up to the sound. It's so real, so vivid. Today I woke up to the sound that she used to make when she'd sit by the window while watching the birds. I live in an apartment, there's no way it's a stray. I woke up from the sound, looked around to see if it was any of my other cats, saw none of them, laid down and heard it again, and I was fully awake. The last time I woke up to the sound of her asking to leave the room. I even went to open the door to see if it was one of my cats, and it wasn't. There was nothing there. Am I going crazy, or is this a normal thing? When my dog died earlier this year, I also heard the sound of his deep breath and his tail wagging. But it was just that, and nothing else. I kind of feel like I'm being mocked by it. It makes me want to cry. See ya.